It started quietly, in a small town where people knew each other's stories before they even happened. In that town lived a girl who never quite fit in. She was the kind of person others noticed only when they needed someone to laugh at. She spoke softly, walked with her head slightly down, and often seemed lost in her own thoughts. When others gathered to talk, she stayed on the edges, her hands folded, pretending not to hear the jokes made about her. She wasn't strange, not really. She just saw the world differently. While others talked about the latest trends or who said what, she liked to watch the sky, listen to birds, and draw on the back pages of her notebooks. Her teachers called her quiet but bright. Her classmates called her boring. She didn't argue. She just smiled politely and stayed quiet, though every word they said left a small mark inside her. At home, she lived with her father, a man who worked long hours and rarely spoke much. Her mother had passed away years earlier, leaving behind a few photos, some old letters, and a piano that sat untouched in the corner of the living room. Sometimes at night, she would sit by that piano, running her fingers across the keys. They were dusty, some even slightly out of tune, but when she pressed them, they still made music, soft, broken, but full of life. She didn't know much about music, only what her mother once taught her when she was small. Play with your heart, not your hands. Those words stayed with her. But no one in her town cared about music. They cared about jobs, money, and looking good in front of others. So when she talked about wanting to play or sing one day, people laughed. Some told her to be realistic, while others chuckled and said, "That's cute." Even her father never encouraged her dreams. He wasn't unkind, just tired, practical, and quiet. "It's good to dream," he once said, "but dreams don't pay the bills." So she learned to keep her dreams to herself. School wasn't easy for her either. Every morning she would walk to class alone, clutching her bag close, hoping the day would pass quietly. But it rarely did. There were always a few students who found her an easy target, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she never fought back. They laughed at her old shoes, her worn-out notebooks, and the way she stuttered when she got nervous. Sometimes they imitated her voice or whispered behind her as she passed. She pretended not to hear them, but she always did. Still, she carried on. She helped teachers, volunteered at the library, and often stayed after school to clean the art room. No one noticed her efforts, but she didn't do them to be noticed. She just wanted to feel useful, to belong somewhere. One afternoon, the school announced an annual talent show. It wasn't a big event, just a small gathering in the auditorium where students performed songs, dances, or comedy acts. The winners received a small trophy, but more than that, they earned attention, praise, and respect, things she had never received. She wanted to take part, but she hesitated. She knew how people would react. They would laugh before she even began. But that night, as she sat by the piano again, she imagined what it might feel like to play in front of others, to share something she truly loved. The idea both scared and thrilled her. The next day, she filled out the form and signed up. Her hands shook as she handed it in. The teacher smiled and wished her luck, but the students nearby whispered. "She's performing," one said. "What's she going to do? Fall on stage?" Another laughed so loudly she had to look away. That evening, she practiced in secret. The piano keys were still old and uneven, but to her, each sound felt alive. She didn't know how to read sheet music properly, so she played by ear, creating her own melody, simple but full of feeling. She practiced every night after her father went to sleep, her fingers trembling as they moved. Sometimes she made mistakes, but she never stopped. Days passed. The night of the show came faster than she expected. The small auditorium was full. Parents, students, teachers, all chatting loudly. The stage lights were bright, almost too bright. She sat backstage, clutching her hands together, listening as the other acts performed. Laughter and applause filled the room. She could hear the crowd cheering for their friends. Then someone called her name. Her heart started pounding. Her legs felt weak. For a moment, she thought about running away, just slipping out the back door and pretending she was never there. But something inside her told her not to. Maybe it was her mother's words echoing softly in her mind. "Play with your heart, not your hands." She walked out slowly, her head slightly bowed, her hands trembling. The room went quieter, but not out of respect and out of curiosity. People whispered, some giggled. "Oh no, she's really going to play," someone said from the crowd. She sat at the piano, trying to block out their voices. The stage lights made it hard to see, but she could feel the eyes on her. She took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a long moment there was silence, the kind that feels heavy and endless. Then she began to play. The first few notes were shaky. Her fingers slipped once and she heard someone snicker. Her throat tightened and she almost stopped. But she didn't. She closed her eyes and remembered why she was there. Not to impress anyone, but to share something that mattered to her. The melody started to flow. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Each note carried a piece of her. The loneliness, the quiet strength, the longing she never spoke about. The music filled the room, soft at first, then stronger, rising and falling like waves. Slowly the laughter faded. The whispers stopped. For the first time, everyone just listened. When she finished, there was silence again, not mocking this time, but stillness. Then someone clapped. Another joined in. Soon the whole room was clapping, loudly, some even standing. She didn't quite understand what was happening. She just sat there, her hands trembling, her heart racing. But before she could feel proud, one voice cut through the applause. "That was cute," a boy said with a smirk. She probably practiced that one song for months. The laughter started again, smaller this time, but it hurt just as much. She smiled weakly, stood up, and walked off the stage. Behind the curtain, her eyes filled with tears. The applause didn't matter anymore. All she could hear was that one voice. That night, she didn't touch the piano. She went straight to her room, closed the door, and sat quietly in the dark. She felt foolish for ever thinking she could be seen differently. Maybe they were right, she thought. Maybe she really was just the strange, quiet girl everyone laughed at. But as she sat there, her gaze fell on a framed photo on her desk, her mother sitting at that same piano smiling. Beneath the photo was a handwritten note her mother once gave her. The ink had faded over the years, but the words were still clear. When people laugh, it means they've noticed. "Don't hide, shine brighter." She read those words again and again. Slowly, something inside her began to change. The hurt didn't disappear, but it turned into something else. A spark, a quiet promise to herself that she wouldn't give up. Not yet. Outside, the town slept under the same quiet stars it always did. Inside that small house, the girl who everyone laughed at sat beside her piano again. She didn't play that night, not yet. She just touched the keys, softly, as if reminding herself that her story wasn't over. And though no one saw it, something began that night. Something stronger than the laughter, deeper than the pain. The first step of a journey that one day would make them all remember the girl they once tried to forget. The days after the talent show passed slowly. The girl tried to go back to her routine, walking to school, sitting quietly in class, pretending not to hear the whispers that still followed her. On the surface, nothing had changed. People still laughed when she passed by, still pointed when she dropped her books, still whispered when she raised her hand to answer a question. But something inside her had changed. Just a little. She didn't understand it at first. It wasn't anger and it wasn't pride. It was something quieter, something steady. It was the memory of the moment when the whole room had gone silent while she played. For a short time they had listened. For a few minutes she had held their attention not because they pitied her, but because they felt something real. That moment mattered more than the laughter that followed. At night, when her father went to sleep, she sat by the piano again. She played softly, not to prove anything, but to remember who she was when the music filled the room. Sometimes she cried without knowing why. Sometimes she smiled. But she never stopped. One evening, her father walked into the living room unexpectedly. She froze mid-song, her fingers still on the keys. He stood there for a moment, tired from work, looking at her. "You're still up," he said quietly. She nodded. "I was just practicing." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "It's late. You should get some sleep." "I will," she said, turning back to the piano. He started to leave, then paused. "That song. It's the one your mother used to play, isn't it?" She looked up, surprised. "You remember?" "Of course," he said, his voice softer now. She loved that song. He stood there a little longer, then went to his room. After he left, she sat there in silence. It was the first time in years he had mentioned her mother. The words gave her warmth, something she hadn't felt in a long time. From that night, her practice had a new meaning. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was a way to feel close to the woman she missed every day. Weeks turned into months. The teasing at school slowly faded. People found new things to talk about, new jokes to make. She was no longer the main target. She was just invisible again, which was fine by her. She spent her free time in the library reading about music, art, and stories of people who followed their dreams despite everything. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling behind them. That quiet fire that made people keep going, even when no one believed in them. One day, while cleaning the art room after class, she found an old poster rolled up in a corner. It was for a youth competition in a nearby city. Show your talent. She read it over and over again. It wasn't a school event. It was open to anyone. The prize wasn't money or fame, just the chance to perform in front of professionals. She wanted to go. But the thought scared her. The city was far. She had never traveled alone. Her father barely made enough for their needs. And most of all, what if it went wrong again? What if she stood there, played her heart out, and people laughed just like before? For days she couldn't decide. She carried the folded poster in her bag, taking it out every night, reading it, then putting it back. One night, while she was washing dishes, her father noticed her staring at the paper again. "What's that?" he asked. "Just a competition," she said quietly. "In the city." He took the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read it. "You want to go?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he asked softly, "Do you really want to?" She looked at him, surprised by the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "Yes," she said, almost whispering. "I do," he nodded slowly. "Then you should try." She stared at him, unsure if she heard him right. "You're not a little girl anymore," he said. "If it's something you love, you should at least try." Her eyes filled with tears. "But what if I fail?" "Then you fail," he said simply. "And then you try again. That's life." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about his words. The next morning she registered for the competition. It was the first real step she had taken toward her dream. The following weeks were full of preparation. She practiced every evening, sometimes until her fingers hurt. The piano wasn't in great shape. A few keys didn't work properly, but she made it work. She recorded her sessions on her phone, listened to them, found her mistakes, and fixed them. There were moments when doubt crept in. She would stop playing, her hands trembling, thinking, maybe I'm not good enough. But then she remembered how she felt on stage that day. The silence, the stillness, the emotion in the room, and she would start again. As the day of the competition approached, her nervousness grew. The night before, she could hardly eat. Her father noticed and said quietly, "You'll be fine. Just be yourself." The next morning, they took an early bus to the city. The road was long and bumpy. She looked out the window the entire time, watching the scenery change. Fields, buildings, crowds. She had never seen so many people before. When they reached the event hall, her heart raced. It was huge compared to her small school auditorium. The contestants were everywhere, singers, dancers, artists, all confident and smiling. She felt small again. Her father put his hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to play your heart." She nodded, her throat tight. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage. The lights were bright again, but this time she didn't look down. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and started to play. The first few notes came out perfectly. Her hands no longer shook. She felt calm, almost peaceful. She played the same melody she had played at school, but this time she added something new, a softer part, something that sounded like hope. As she played, she thought of her mother. She imagined her sitting nearby, smiling like she used to. That thought gave her strength. When she finished, there was silence for a moment, and then applause. Real applause. She looked up and saw the judges smiling. One of them even stood. She didn't win first place that day, but she didn't care. After the event, one of the judges came to her. "You have something special," he said kindly. "Keep practicing. Don't stop." Those words stayed with her. On the bus ride home, she sat quietly beside her father. He didn't say much, but she saw the small smile on his face. That was enough. From that day, something changed again. Not in the world, but inside her. The laughter of the past didn't echo as loudly anymore. The teasing didn't matter. She had found something stronger than all of that belief. She still faced hard days. There were still times when self-doubt crept in, when life felt unfair, when she wanted to give up. But now she had a reason not to. She started saving every bit she could. Money from small chores, tutoring younger students, even helping at a local store. She wanted to buy a new keyboard so she could practice better. It took months, but eventually, she bought a second-hand one. It wasn't fancy, but to her it was everything. Every night she sat by it and played, not to escape anymore, but to grow. Her confidence began to show in small ways. At school, she started volunteering for things she used to avoid. Reading out loud, helping in events, even greeting new students. People noticed the change, though they couldn't explain it. Some who used to laugh at her now greeted her politely. A few even apologized in quiet, awkward ways. She didn't hold grudges. She had moved on. But deep down, she knew her journey had just begun. The world outside was much bigger than her small town, and she wanted to see how far her music could take her. One night, while practicing, she recorded a short clip and uploaded it online. Not for fame, but just to share it with anyone who might listen. She didn't expect much, but the next morning her phone was full of notifications. People from different places had watched it. They commented, "Beautiful, so emotional, play more." For the first time, people weren't laughing. They were listening. She sat there in disbelief, tears in her eyes, realizing that maybe, just maybe, her mother's words were right all along. People laugh when they don't understand. But one day, when they do, they'll never forget what they once ignored. That day, as the sun set through the small window of her room, she smiled. The laughter that once broke her now felt distant, like an old memory fading away. She had found her voice, not through shouting, but through music, and she promised herself quietly. This was only the beginning. The girl's life began to change slowly, though not in ways anyone could immediately notice. She still went to school, still walked past the same hallways, still smiled politely when classmates whispered behind her back. But now, when she heard the old jokes and laughter, they didn't hurt as much. She had found something stronger than their words. A quiet confidence that came from knowing she had taken the first real steps toward her dreams. Her music had become her refuge, her strength and her voice. Every evening she practiced diligently, trying new melodies, experimenting with chords, and recording herself. She noticed that with each session she could feel more control, more expression in her fingers. Music was no longer just a way to escape. It was a way to communicate feelings that words could never express. One day, while browsing online for music competitions, she came across a notice for a regional talent showcase. It was open to performers of all kinds: singers, musicians, dancers, and even poets. The prize was more significant than any she had ever encountered: an opportunity to perform at a city festival, the chance for local recognition, and a mentorship program with professional musicians. Her heart raced as she read the details. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the real chance to show the world what she could do. But with excitement came fear. She had only performed in small spaces before: her school auditorium, her living room, a few classrooms. This was different. It was bigger. Crowds would notice her. People who had laughed at her might watch again. Still, she remembered her father's words: "If it's something you love, you should at least try." And her mother's words: "Play with your heart, not your hands." She knew she couldn't let fear stop her. She signed up. The following weeks were a mixture of hard work and quiet worry. She practiced tirelessly, staying up late into the night, perfecting her piece. The melodies she created reflected her journey. Soft beginnings that grew stronger and more confident as the piece progressed. She wanted every note to carry emotion, to tell her story without saying a single word. At school, she began to notice small changes in herself. She carried herself differently, walked with a little more purpose, and even smiled more often. Some students noticed the change, though not everyone. A few whispered about her in the hallways, some with curiosity rather than mockery this time. It was as if people could sense something different about her, though they didn't know what it was yet. The day of the showcase arrived. Her father drove her to the city, and she stared out of the window the entire way. The streets were bustling, the buildings tall and crowded, and the world suddenly felt much bigger than her small town. Her heart pounded with both excitement and nervousness. When they arrived at the venue, she was stunned. The hall was huge, with bright lights and a stage that seemed to stretch forever. Performers were warming up, chatting with friends, tuning their instruments, and preparing in ways that made her feel small and uncertain. She looked around and almost felt herself shrinking. Her father noticed her hesitation and squeezed her hand. "You've prepared for this," he said quietly. "Play for yourself and nothing else matters." She nodded, taking a deep breath. Backstage, the wait felt endless. Each performer went on stage and received applause, smiles, and nods from the judges. The audience seemed large, intimidating, and distant. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She wondered, what if they laugh again? What if I fail? But then she closed her eyes for a moment and remembered all the nights she had spent alone, practicing in her room, learning from her mistakes, and holding on to her dream. She remembered the small triumphs, the moments of growth, the way music had always given her comfort. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The bright lights made it difficult to see the audience, but she didn't care. She walked to the piano and sat down. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the keys, but she took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were soft and careful, testing the space and the sound. Then slowly her confidence grew. She allowed the music to carry her, to guide her fingers, to tell the story she had kept inside for so long. The melody started quiet, almost fragile, but then it built, each note stronger, richer, filled with emotion. At first, some people whispered, unsure of what they were hearing. But soon the room grew silent. All the chatter faded. The audience was captivated, drawn into the music. She could feel their attention, not because of who she was, but because of what she had created. Every note carried her struggle, her perseverance, her dreams, and her hope. When the piece ended, there was a brief silence, and then the hall erupted in applause. The sound was overwhelming. She looked up and saw the judges smiling, nodding, and even some standing to clap. Her heart swelled, but she tried not to cry in front of everyone. After stepping off the stage, she couldn't stop shaking. Backstage, a fellow contestant came up to her. "That was incredible," they said. "I've never heard anything like it." Even as she accepted the praise, her mind wandered to the faces she remembered from school, the ones who had laughed at her. She imagined how they might react if they could see her now, but she quickly pushed the thought away. She didn't need their approval anymore. The judges called her to speak with them. They complimented her skill, her emotion, and her dedication. They said her performance showed real promise, and they encouraged her to continue learning and practicing. One of them even offered her the chance to join a small mentorship program, which could help her grow her talent further. That evening, she returned home on the bus, sitting quietly beside her father. She could hardly believe what had happened. The applause, the compliments, the recognition, it felt unreal. She was exhausted, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came from giving everything she had and finally being seen. In the following days, the story of the showcase began to spread. Some people from her town saw it online. A few classmates sent awkward messages asking how she had prepared and congratulating her. Some teachers called to praise her dedication. She felt a strange mix of pride and disbelief. Her life didn't change overnight, but her perspective did. She began to understand that the world was bigger than her small town, bigger than the laughter she had endured. There were people who would listen, who would care, and who would recognize her talent. She didn't need everyone to understand her, only those who mattered. The experience gave her courage to try more. She began exploring other opportunities, performing at local events and sharing her music online. Each time she did, her confidence grew and the fear of failure shrank. She learned to trust herself, to believe that her voice mattered. At school, the teasing still existed in small ways, but it no longer defined her. She walked with a new sense of purpose, knowing that what she had to offer was far greater than the shallow judgments of others. Slowly, some classmates began to see her differently, though she never let their opinions control her. Her father noticed the change most of all. He watched her practice late at night, saw the joy on her face when she played, and felt a sense of pride he had never expressed before. One evening, he said quietly, "You've grown so much. I don't think you realize it yet, but people are starting to see who you really are." She smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. She realized he was right. She was changing, not for anyone else, but for herself. And in that change, she had discovered something she had never known before. Strength. The girl who had once been laughed at, ignored, and overlooked was slowly becoming someone impossible to ignore. Not because she demanded attention, but because she had worked tirelessly, quietly, and passionately to create something meaningful. The laughter of the past no longer had power over her, and though the journey was far from over, she knew one thing for certain. This was her path, and she would walk it no matter what. The world had finally begun to notice, and the girl who had once been invisible was beginning to shine. The months following the regional showcase were a blur of practice, small performances, and quiet determination. The girl had discovered a world she never imagined, one where people listened, appreciated, and even encouraged her. She continued to study music, experimenting with new melodies and compositions, pushing herself further than she ever had. Each note she played carried a piece of her soul, and with each performance, she felt herself becoming stronger. One morning, while scrolling through her phone, she saw an advertisement for a national talent festival. It was bigger than anything she had done before. The competition was fierce, with hundreds of participants from all over the country. Winners would receive professional guidance, opportunities to perform at major events, and a chance to record their music. Her heart raced. She had dreamed of this, but doubt quickly crept in. What if I fail? What if they laugh like before? The fear was familiar, but it no longer held her back. She remembered every hour she had spent practicing alone, every small victory, every moment she had chosen persistence over fear. She knew she had to try. Her father helped her with the registration. He didn't say much, only giving her a quiet nod of support. It was enough. She practiced harder than ever, refining her music until each note sounded exactly as she imagined. She recorded herself, listened carefully, and adjusted the smallest details. She knew that preparation was her strongest ally. The day of the national festival arrived. Traveling to the big city was overwhelming. The streets were crowded, the buildings tall and intimidating, and the sheer size of the venue made her nervous. But she carried herself with calm determination. She was no longer the timid girl who had been laughed at on a small school stage. She had grown silently but powerfully into someone who believed in her own worth. Backstage, she watched the other participants. They were confident, polished, and talented. Some smiled at her politely, while others barely noticed her. The nerves returned briefly, whispering doubts into her mind.
What am I doing here?
Can I really compete with them? She closed her eyes and remembered her first performance, the one where the audience had gone silent. She remembered the feeling of being truly heard, even for a few minutes. That memory gave her strength. She opened her eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared to step onto the stage. When her name was announced, she walked forward slowly. The bright lights were almost blinding, but she didn't look at the audience. She focused on the piano in front of her, the instrument she had grown up with, the one that had never let her down. She sat, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The music started softly, each note carefully placed. At first, she noticed a few whispers in the audience, some skepticism. But she didn't falter. She let the music flow naturally, letting it carry her story. She played with everything she had, her fear, her hope, her determination, and her dreams. As the piece progressed, the room grew silent. The whispers faded, replaced by attentive listening. She could feel the energy of the audience, but it no longer intimidated her. It inspired her. Each note she played told her story, the loneliness, the laughter she had endured, the nights she had spent practicing alone, and the quiet strength she had built along the way. By the time she finished, the audience was completely captivated. There was a moment of silence, heavy and full of awe, before the applause erupted. It was louder than anything she had ever heard, a wave of appreciation and recognition. She looked up, tears welling in her eyes, and saw the judges smiling, nodding, and even standing to clap. The judges called her forward after the performance. They praised her skill, her emotion, and her courage. One of them said, "You have something very rare. Keep going. You are meant for more." Another offered to connect her with mentors who could help her further develop her music. Walking off the stage, she felt a mix of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had faced her fears, shared her talent with the world, and been recognized for it. For the first time, she realized how far she had come from the girl who had once been laughed at in her school auditorium. Back in the hotel room that evening, she sat quietly, reflecting. Her phone buzzed with messages from people she didn't know, strangers who had watched the live stream of her performance, praising her music, calling it beautiful, and asking her to share more. She realized that her talent had reached beyond her town, beyond the classrooms where she had once felt invisible. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. She was invited to perform at small events, featured in local newspapers, and even asked for interviews by youth magazines. Each opportunity brought a new wave of excitement, but also new challenges. She had to learn how to present herself, how to speak confidently about her work, and how to handle the attention she was receiving. Despite the growing recognition, she remained humble. She remembered the nights of doubt, the moments when she felt invisible, and the long hours she had spent practicing in silence. She knew that the applause and praise were not the goal. The real achievement was the journey she had undertaken to reach this point. At school, things began to change. Some classmates who had mocked her now treated her differently, with curiosity or admiration. A few approached her quietly, apologizing for their past behavior. Others remained indifferent, but it no longer mattered. She had learned that her worth was not determined by others' opinions, but by her own dedication and courage. One afternoon, a teacher who had always believed in her approached her. "You've grown so much," the teacher said. "I always knew you had something special." The girl smiled, feeling warmth and validation, but also a quiet resolve. She knew that she still had a long way to go, and this was only a step on a much bigger journey. Her father noticed the change most of all. He saw the confidence in her eyes, the determination in her posture, and the joy she found in her music. One evening, he said, "You've become someone people can't ignore, not because you demand attention, but because you've worked so hard and stayed true to yourself." She smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. The laughter of the past no longer had power over her. Every moment of doubt, every harsh word, and every lonely night had led her to this point. A girl who had once been invisible, now impossible to overlook. As her recognition grew, she also began to inspire others. Younger students and aspiring musicians reached out to her online, asking for advice, sharing their own struggles, and seeking encouragement. She realized that her journey could help others who felt unseen, unheard, or discouraged. She began to share her story, speaking about the importance of persistence, self-belief, and following one's passion despite fear. She never forgot the girl she had once been, shy, awkward, and laughed at. That memory kept her grounded, humble, and determined to use her experiences to uplift others. She understood that her success was not just about talent, but about resilience, courage, and the decision to keep going when everything seemed impossible. One day, she returned to her school to perform at a small event. The auditorium was the same as it had always been, though she now walked onto the stage with confidence. Students who had once laughed at her sat in the audience, some curious, some respectful. She played the piano with the same emotion and dedication she had cultivated over the years. When she finished, the applause was genuine, heartfelt, and louder than she had ever imagined. Some of her former classmates approached her, not with mockery but with admiration. She smiled politely, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She didn't need them to validate her anymore. She had already proven to herself what she was capable of. Her music, her journey, and her perseverance had transformed her from the girl everyone laughed at into someone unforgettable. She had discovered that recognition was not about the applause, but about the courage to continue, the ability to believe in herself, and the willingness to face challenges head-on. As she packed up her things and prepared to leave the school, she looked around the auditorium one last time. It was the same space where she had once felt invisible, the same place where her first performance had been met with laughter. But now it felt different. It felt like a place of triumph, growth, and transformation. She stepped outside, the sun shining warmly on her face, and realized that she had not only changed the way others saw her, but the way she saw herself. The girl who had once been laughed at was now a girl who inspired, a girl who persevered, and a girl who would never be forgotten. And though her journey was far from over, she knew that this turning point, the moment when her talent, courage, and heart came together, was proof that anything was possible for those who refused to give up. Even in the face of doubt and laughter, years passed, and the girl who had once been laughed at had grown into a young woman whose name carried respect and admiration. She had faced countless challenges along the way, but each one had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more determined than she had ever imagined. The shy, timid girl who had once walked the halls hoping not to be noticed had become someone whose presence could not be ignored. Her music had evolved as she had evolved. What had once been simple melodies played on a worn-out piano had become intricate compositions that told stories without words. People listened not just for the notes but for the emotions woven into each performance. Her music spoke of perseverance, of quiet strength, of the courage it takes to keep going when the world seems to be against you. Opportunities came one after another. She was invited to perform at larger venues, collaborate with professional musicians, and even mentor young artists who reminded her of the girl she had once been. Every stage she stepped on, every note she played, reminded her of the journey she had traveled, from laughter and doubt to recognition and respect. Despite the growing attention and praise, she remained humble. She never sought fame for its own sake. Instead, she wanted to inspire others who felt invisible, unheard, or underestimated. She shared her story openly, talking about the times she had cried alone in her room, the nights she had practiced until her fingers ached, and the moments when she had doubted herself but kept going anyway. People connected with her story because it was real, raw, and human. In her small town, things had changed too. The people who had once mocked her were forced to see her in a new light. Some approached her with apologies, acknowledging the way they had treated her years before. Others remained distant, unable to reconcile the quiet girl they had laughed at with the woman who now stood before them. But it didn't matter to her anymore. She no longer needed validation from those who had doubted her. She had found her own voice, and that voice was powerful enough to carry her forward. Her father, who had always supported her quietly, watched with pride. He had seen the shy, lonely girl who sat by the piano in the corner of their home, unsure if anyone would ever understand her. And now he saw a young woman who had faced fear, rejection, and doubt, and had emerged stronger on the other side. He never said much, but the small smiles, the occasional nods, and the quiet pride in his eyes spoke volumes. One afternoon, she returned to her old school to perform at an event for students who were just beginning to explore their own talents. The auditorium was full of young faces, some shy, some excited, some unsure of themselves. She looked around and remembered the first time she had performed in that same space, when the audience had laughed and whispered behind her back. This time, she walked onto the stage with confidence. She sat at the piano and began to play. The music was soft at first, gentle enough to draw the students in. Then it grew stronger, more confident, filled with the emotions of every struggle, every victory, and every lesson she had learned. The students listened intently, captivated not just by the notes but by the story each one told. After the performance, she spoke to them. She told them about the nights she had spent practicing alone, the moments she had felt invisible, and the courage it had taken to keep going despite fear and doubt. She told them that talent alone was not enough. It was perseverance, determination, and belief in oneself that made the difference. The students were silent at first, then began to applaud, not just for her music but for the journey she had shared. From that day on, she became a mentor and inspiration to many. She started programs to help young artists in her town, offering lessons, guidance, and encouragement to those who felt overlooked or underestimated. She shared her knowledge freely, remembering how much it had meant to her when someone had once encouraged her to try. She knew that even a small word of support could change a life. Her recognition continued to grow. She performed at national events, collaborated with established musicians, and even recorded her own music. But no matter how successful she became, she never forgot the girl she had once been, the girl who had been laughed at, ignored, and underestimated. That memory kept her grounded, humble, and connected to the people who looked up to her. One evening, she was invited to a special event honoring young achievers. She was nervous as she walked onto the stage to receive an award. The audience was full of people who had heard of her journey, who knew the story of the girl they had once laughed at. When she stepped up to accept the award, the applause was overwhelming. She felt tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not hurt. She spoke to the audience, sharing her story with honesty and warmth. She talked about the laughter, the doubt, and the fear she had faced, and how she had found strength within herself to keep going. She told them that anyone could overcome obstacles if they believed in themselves and worked tirelessly toward their goals. The audience listened, captivated, inspired, and moved. After the event, she walked outside into the cool night air. She looked up at the sky, remembering the countless nights she had spent practicing in her room, imagining a future she wasn't sure she would ever reach. Now that future was real. She had become the girl she had always hoped to be, strong, confident, talented, and unforgettable. Back in her hometown, she continued to inspire others. The programs she had started grew, reaching more young people who had felt invisible or overlooked. She offered workshops, performances, and mentoring sessions, always emphasizing the importance of self-belief and persistence. She became a role model not just because of her talent, but because of the journey she had taken and the courage she had shown along the way. People began to tell her story widely. Articles were written, interviews were conducted, and her journey from being laughed at to being unforgettable became a source of inspiration for many. She never sought the attention, but she accepted it gracefully, knowing that it could help others who were struggling to find their own voices. One day, she returned to the old talent show venue in her town, the place where it had all begun. The piano was still there, worn and a little dusty, but it remained a symbol of the start of her journey. She sat down and played quietly, her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys. The music carried the story of every struggle, every tear, every moment of perseverance. It was a tribute to the girl she had once been, and a celebration of the woman she had become. As she finished, she smiled softly. The applause was only in her mind this time, but it didn't matter. She had achieved something far greater than recognition or fame. She had discovered her strength, her voice, and her purpose. She had turned laughter into motivation, doubt into determination, and invisibility into influence. Her father watched from the doorway, a quiet smile on his face. He had seen the journey from the beginning, from the shy, quiet girl to the woman who had inspired countless others. He didn't need words. He knew that she had become someone extraordinary. The girl who had once been laughed at was now the girl everyone would remember. She had proven that the opinions of others did not define her, and that perseverance, passion, and self-belief could transform any life. She had taken the pain of being underestimated and turned it into strength, using it to not only change her own future, but to inspire countless others along the way. In the years that followed, she continued to grow, perform, and mentor. Her music reached people in cities far beyond her hometown. She received invitations to international events, collaborations with renowned artists, and opportunities to share her story on larger platforms. Yet she never forgot the humble beginnings that had shaped her character and her heart. Even with fame and recognition, she remained approachable and genuine. People felt her sincerity, the realness of her journey, and the humility that had never left her. She often said in interviews, "I was once the girl they laughed at. I was once invisible. And if I could make it through, anyone can. Believe in yourself even when no one else does." She also took the time to visit schools, community centers, and local events, encouraging young people to follow their passions, no matter how impossible their dreams might seem. She shared practical advice, but more importantly, she shared hope. She became a living example that persistence, courage, and heart could change a life. As her story spread, she realized that her journey was more than her own success. It was a legacy. The girl they once laughed at had grown into someone unforgettable, not just for her talent, but for the way she had transformed her pain into purpose, her struggles into strength, and her silence into a powerful voice that inspired others. And one quiet evening, as she played the piano in her hometown, she felt at peace. She had come full circle. The laughter of the past no longer mattered. The girl who had once felt invisible had become the woman who would never be forgotten. Her story, her music, and her courage would continue to inspire for years to come, proving that even the quietest voices can leave the deepest impact. The girl they laughed at had truly become the girl they would never forget.